The roots of Britain's attachment to the Falkland Islands reach deeply into the intertwined histories of exploration, empire, and identity. The islands first appeared on European maps in the 16th century, claimed at various times by the French, Spanish, and British, each driven by strategic ambition and maritime competition. When Britain formally re-established control in 1833, it did so in an age when naval dominance defined global power and the ability to command distant oceans symbolized national strength. Over generations, the Falklands became part of Britain's wider imperial narrative, a frontier outpost embodying discipline, resilience, and continuity across hemispheres. Yet beyond imperial rhetoric lay a more intimate story, a small community built on self-reliance, linked to Britain by culture and citizenship rather than conquest. This continuity forged a sense of belonging that endured long after the empire waned. The 1982 conflict with Argentina reaffirmed this historical connection in dramatic fashion. What began as a dispute over sovereignty evolved into a test of national resolve and moral legitimacy. Britain's victory did not merely reclaim territory. It revitalized domestic confidence and reasserted the idea that distance need not diminish responsibility. The war also embedded the Falklands in collective memory as a symbol of endurance, a proof that the United Kingdom, even in an age of decline, would defend its people wherever they lived. Today, that historical memory continues to shape both policy and sentiment. The Falklands are seen not only as a geographical inheritance, but as a living monument to perseverance, integrity, and the enduring reach of British identity in a post-imperial world. The significance of the Falklands extends far beyond nostalgia. It is anchored in geography and global security. Situated in the South Atlantic, roughly midway between southern Argentina and the gateway to Antarctica, the islands occupy a pivotal maritime crossroads. Control of the surrounding waters provides access to critical sea lanes connecting the Atlantic and Pacific via Cape Horn. For centuries, such routes shaped global trade and strategic competition. Even in the modern era of air transport and satellite surveillance, the Falklands remain essential for maintaining a sustained presence in the South Atlantic and adjacent polar regions. The United Kingdom's defense policy after 1982 reflected this reality. The establishment of RAF Mount Pleasant and a permanent naval detachment transformed the islands into a forward operating base capable of supporting regional stability, scientific missions, and humanitarian relief. Beyond immediate defense, the Falklands grant Britain leverage within emerging geopolitical arenas, especially those linked to the Antarctic Treaty System and the governance of marine resources. They form part of a triad, together with South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands, that extends British influence deep into the Southern Hemisphere. Strategically, the islands also serve as a symbol of deterrence, a signal that the United Kingdom retains both the will and the capacity to protect its interests across the globe. In an age defined by multipolar rivalry, cyber threats, and climate-driven migration, the ability to project stability from such a remote yet vital location enhances Britain's standing among allies and partners alike. The Falklands thus function as both anchor and compass, anchoring national defense and orienting Britain's maritime vision toward the open, contested frontiers of the modern world. While strategic logic sustains Britain's military presence, economic potential reinforces its long-term commitment. The waters surrounding the Falklands form one of the most productive marine ecosystems on Earth, rich in squid, finfish, and krill. Since the 1980s, the establishment of an exclusive fisheries zone has transformed the island's economy, funding self-government and infrastructure development while creating one of the most efficiently managed fisheries in the world. Licensing revenues have allowed the local administration to invest in education, healthcare, and renewable energy, reducing dependence on the United Kingdom's budget. Beyond fisheries, the region holds promise in hydrocarbons and critical minerals. Exploratory drilling in the North Falkland Basin has revealed commercially viable oil reserves, though exploitation remains tempered by environmental considerations and fluctuating markets. These resources, combined with emerging blue economy sectors such as ecotourism and scientific logistics, position the islands as a potential hub of sustainable growth. For Britain, This economic autonomy carries dual significance. It demonstrates that overseas territories can achieve fiscal self-reliance while preserving transparency and conservation standards, and it reinforces the narrative that the Falklands are a modern partnership rather than a colonial dependency. The management of natural wealth under the oversight of both London and the local assembly illustrates a pragmatic model of shared sovereignty in practice, anchored in mutual respect, accountability, and long-term stewardship. In an age of global scarcity and environmental consciousness, the Falklands' success in balancing prosperity with protection elevates them from a disputed territory to a case study in responsible governance, where economic vitality strengthens rather than undermines moral legitimacy. Britain's attachment to the Falklands is sustained as much by ethics as by economics or strategy. The islands symbolize a compact between state and citizen, the conviction that democratic communities deserve protection irrespective of scale or distance. When Britain defended the islands in 1982, it did so not merely to preserve a patch of land, but to uphold the right of its people to live under the government they freely choose. This principle, once enacted through military resolve, has since matured into a moral cornerstone of British foreign policy. It aligns the Falklands with global struggles for self-determination, casting them as an example of post-colonial legitimacy rather than imperial persistence. In Westminster debates and international forums alike, the argument consistently returns to consent. The islanders are not relics of empire, but citizens who affirm their British identity through democratic expression. This moral clarity gives Britain an unusual advantage in the court of global opinion. While critics may frame the issue as a colonial residue, Britain redefines it as a question of rights and responsibilities. Furthermore, the Falklands' internal democracy, marked by transparency, local representation, and judicial independence, embodies the values Britain seeks to champion abroad. Their institutions function without corruption or repression, offering a tangible contrast to narratives of decline or hypocrisy. The moral dimension thus bridges domestic and global politics. Defending the islands becomes a reaffirmation of democratic duty. In the end, Britain's enduring care reflects not sentimentality but conviction, that legitimacy flows from the consent of the governed, and that this consent, freely given, is worth protecting against both history's ghosts and future uncertainties. Central to Britain's enduring claim and defense of the Falklands is the inviolable principle of self-determination. The conviction that political legitimacy arises from the will of the people rather than from historic possession or geographic proximity. The islanders' overwhelming desire to remain British has been demonstrated repeatedly, most decisively in the 2013 referendum, where over 99% voted to preserve the existing constitutional status. For the United Kingdom, this result provided not only a legal foundation but a moral shield. It reframed the sovereignty debate from one of competing territorial narratives to one of universal human rights. In defending that choice, Britain asserts that the right of communities to define their political future is a cornerstone of international order. This framing carries significant weight because it aligns Britain's stance with the post-colonial evolution of global norms. Where imperial powers once imposed identities, modern democracies are expected to protect them. The Falklands thus become a test case for how historical responsibility can coexist with modern ethical standards. Moreover, the local government exercises a degree of autonomy rare among small territories, maintaining fiscal independence, environmental oversight, and judicial transparency. This self-governing success story reinforces Britain's narrative that sovereignty is shared, not imposed, and that partnership can replace paternalism. Through the Falklands, Britain showcases a model of democratic interdependence that respects both local choice and metropolitan obligation. It also signals to the wider world that consent, not conquest, defines legitimate governance in the 21st century. The right of self-determination, therefore, transforms the Falklands from a relic of empire into a living proof of moral continuity, a small but potent reaffirmation of Britain's belief that its global role endures precisely because it defends principles larger than itself. The defense of the Falklands operates as both a practical necessity and a symbolic projection of Britain's global capability. Since the 1982 conflict, successive governments have treated the islands as a permanent anchor of southern Atlantic security. RAF Mount Pleasant, with its integrated air and naval infrastructure, represents one of the most sophisticated remote defense installations in the world. Its presence reassures the islanders while also signaling to potential aggressors that any renewed challenge would meet swift and decisive resistance. Yet, Britain's investment in defense goes beyond deterrence. It reflects a doctrine of global engagement. The ability to project force responsibly across distant regions reinforces Britain's identity as a nation that couples diplomacy with readiness. Mount Pleasant functions not only as a fortress, but as a hub for cooperation, hosting joint exercises with allies, supporting Antarctic research, and providing humanitarian assistance in emergencies. These activities strengthen Britain's partnerships with NATO members and Commonwealth allies, while contributing to regional stability. Moreover, defense spending on the islands has stimulated innovation in logistics, renewable energy, and communications, fields that connect national security with technological advancement. Strategically, the Falklands also preserve Britain's maritime autonomy in an era when great power competition is re-emerging across polar and oceanic frontiers. In maintaining a credible presence there, the United Kingdom affirms that retreat from global responsibility is not an option. The defense of the Falklands thus transcends geography. It is an ongoing declaration that Britain's commitment to its citizens, allies, and ideals remains active, disciplined, and enduring, rooted in the principle that peace is best guaranteed by the readiness to protect it. Diplomacy surrounding the Falklands continues to balance firmness of principle with flexibility of engagement. While Argentina maintains its sovereignty claim, invoking historical grievance and geographical proximity, Britain anchors its position in legality and democracy. This divergence ensures persistent tension, yet it has also encouraged creative diplomacy. Both nations periodically collaborate on fisheries conservation, environmental research, and humanitarian issues such as the identification of war graves. These cooperative gestures, though limited, demonstrate that dialogue remains possible even amid profound disagreement. Britain's broader diplomatic objective is to demonstrate that its global presence is compatible with regional partnership. By treating the Falklands not as an imperial outpost, but as a democratic community within the South Atlantic neighborhood, the United Kingdom seeks to dispel outdated perceptions of colonialism. The island's prosperity and governance provide an implicit rebuttal to accusations of illegitimacy. At the same time, British diplomacy carefully avoids triumphalism. It emphasizes respect for Argentina's cultural ties while insisting that the will of the islanders cannot be overridden. In regional terms, this measured posture allows Britain to sustain constructive relations with Latin American states on trade, education, and development. The Falklands therefore operate as a microcosm of Britain's foreign policy balance, assertive yet conciliatory, principled yet pragmatic. On the world stage, they test the endurance of the international system's commitment to democratic self-determination in the face of revisionist claims. Through persistent diplomacy and transparent governance, Britain ensures that the Falklands remain a bridge rather than a barrier, a space where history, law, and human choice converge to define a modern relationship between sovereignty and cooperation. The future of the Falklands is inseparable from Britain's evolving conception of global purpose in an age defined by climate change, technology, and shifting alliances. Located at the threshold of Antarctica, the islands are destined to gain new strategic and ecological importance as polar resources and shipping routes grow in value. Britain's stewardship of the Falklands thus carries a dual responsibility: to safeguard sovereignty and to lead in sustainable governance. The local government has already invested heavily in renewable energy, waste management, and marine conservation, demonstrating that even small territories can model environmental resilience. These initiatives align with Britain's wider commitment to net zero emissions and global biodiversity protection. Economically, the island's role as a logistical hub for Antarctic science and ecotourism will expand, blending prosperity with preservation. Politically, their continued stability affirms that decolonization need not mean detachment. Partnership can evolve without erasing identity. As Britain redefines its post-Brexit international stance, the Falklands embody a narrative of continuity amid change. They remind allies and rivals alike that Britain's global relevance rests not merely on force or finance, but on the credibility of its institutions and the consistency of its values. In decades to come, the islands will likely serve as a case study in adaptive sovereignty, a democratic microstate sustained through cooperation, innovation, and shared purpose. The Falklands' endurance, both symbolic and practical, ensures that Britain's concern for them remains not an echo of empire, but an expression of stewardship. They represent a compact between past and future, proving that influence measured through integrity can outlast empires and reshape the meaning of global presence itself.